How is everyone doing? Strength Chat episode 85, and today I have got a very special guest for you. Today I'm joined by a coach working with the Strength guys, and he took 5 athletes to this year's World Championships. Today I am joined by Alfred Jong. How are you doing?
Hey, Stephen, thanks for having me. I'm doing fantastic. Even better now that I'm on your show.
Spot on. So what have you been up to? How are you doing? What's been going on in your world recently?
As you mentioned, back in, it's June, or it was back in June already. So in June, I went to Worlds, and after that, pretty much just took a bit of a break. It was quite the trip. Needless to say, we spent 2 weeks in Sweden, getting all the athletes prepared, make sure everybody arrives on time, everyone made weight and whatnot. And then after, just took a bit of a mini vacation, and now we're preparing for competitions coming up. So we have USAPL Raw Nationals coming up in October, and we also have a few athletes competing at the European Championships in December, I believe.
Okay. Are you heading over to the Europeans in December, or will you be keeping an eye out from afar, if you like?
It's still undetermined right now. It kind of depends on what the wife wants, and if I'm allowed to go, then I'm there.
Yeah, I think it's always best to get the permission of the real boss if anyone ever goes anywhere.
That's what it's all about.
So chatting about Worlds. Going into Worlds and obviously the recap afterwards, was it what you expected? What was the outcome of that? How are you sort of feeling about the performance at Worlds with your athletes?
Worlds was it was definitely not what I expected. Most of it for the better. Worst scenario was one of my athletes. So she got there, and the minute I mentioned she, I'm pretty sure people that are watching know who I'm talking about. But she arrived there quite a bit earlier than we did. She had some, I think she had like a workshop or something like that to attend to, which is fine. She still kept up with training and whatnot. And then I was still back in Canada, and I think about a week before she competes, I get a phone call, and it's not good when you get a phone call. And it's like, "Coach, I have something to tell you." I'm like, "What?" "I broke my finger." I'm like, No, you didn't. And she took a picture, and her pinky was just the size of her thumb, and then she slipped and broke her finger. I'm like, oh boy. And she literally competes in less than a week. And I'm like, okay, let's calm down. Let's see what we can work with here. But in the end, she had a fantastic turnout. She went 9 for 9, setting PRs. She set a New Zealand total record, I believe, and I think a deadlift record as well. But all in all, she did fantastic. The other athletes, everybody had a really good prep, hard prep. I would say last 2 to 3 weeks, most people were not feeling the greatest. All the aches and pains starts coming back up, but their hard work definitely paid off. Everybody performed very, very well. We had a few athletes that were competing for the first time on the international platform, and they handled themselves very well. They were very composed. They were very professional, and they performed as they should.
Nice. So how was it for you, obviously having 5 athletes at Worlds? How was it for you sort of being that busy whilst you were there? Did it all go as you planned as well? Obviously, you can't always expect someone to say that they've slipped and broken the finger, but how did you find it from a coach's point of view, taking that many athletes to Worlds?
It wasn't too bad. Main reason was because it was very spread out. So I had some juniors, which was kind of really early on. And as the days progressed, I had some 66s, 74s, and 83s. So they were a little bit more spread out, which made things a little bit easier. The toughest day was probably the 74s because we had the 66s, because we had the 66 men in the morning and the 63 women's later that afternoon. So we had to get there probably about 7 in the morning, and we stayed at a far Airbnb. So it was either take a bus, which we weren't sure if buses were running that early in the morning. So I actually walked. So it was like a 45-minute walk to the venue. I actually didn't mind it. It was a nice walk to kind of wake me up and kind of clear my head a little bit. but we were there probably till about 7 p.m. or something like that. And yeah, it was just a long day in general, but overall the experience was great. I had a chance to meet with a lot of coaches, catch up with some old friends, and make some new friends. In general, it was run quite well.
Yeah. Oh, cool. I know from a fan as well, watching the Worlds. It looked like a really good venue, and a really good setup. Especially watching it from Calgary the year before as well. I think it followed on really nicely from last year as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So for everyone listening who might not know your background and how you got to work with the strength guys and become a coach and work with the athletes that you've worked with, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
For sure. So I'm actually one of few coaches that didn't start out in powerlifting. I actually started out as a Taekwondo athlete. So I started in martial arts from a very young age, and eventually worked my way up to becoming a coach for regional, national, and international level. And at some point, I decided to, hang up the belt and pursue a 9-to-5 career. That was fine for about a year, and I got bored. I personally, I just like to move around a lot. I like to be, I like to have my sleeves rolled up and be in the trenches with athletes. Being in an office wasn't my ideal scenario.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was competing as a 54 kilo fighter, so I was quite small. And like anybody else, I just wanted to bulk up and start hitting the gym. And next thing you know, I needed some kind of structure to my programming. I couldn't just do the arm day, chest day, and whatnot. So I wrote myself a program, and next thing you know, people thought I was powerlifting because I was squatting, 3-4 times a week, deadlifting, bench pressing, which was uncommon in a commercial gym.
Yeah.
And I got introduced to powerlifting. My girlfriend and I did a couple of meets. We started provincial level, worked our way up to national level, and by the time we got to world level, I got recruited by Jason from the Strength Guys, and that's kind of how I started. I never envisioned myself as a powerlifting coach because I didn't know that actually existed.
Yeah.
I didn't know coaching for the sport actually was a thing. From what I saw on TV, or on live stream, it's just lifters.
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was that much of a coaching aspect involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, you mentioned there that you started out obviously with was it Taekwondo? You mentioned there.
Yes.
And you've got your own podcast as well with that?
Yeah, we started our own podcast, my partner and I, and it's completely different. I thought it would be very similar to powerlifting, but it's with Taekwondo because it's it's an older martial art. So you have a lot of athletes that are not as in tune with the science background, and with a lot of coaches in the sport, most of them are still kind of old school, I guess you would say. With the traditional methods, and less involved with, the more up-to-date literature with strength conditioning, with nutrition and whatnot. And back in like my training back in the day was kind of proof of that. Like we had zero actual nutrition guidance. It was like, well, you need to make weight, so find a way to do it. Like, okay, let's all go to sauna. Let's just sweat our asses off.
Yeah. Yeah. So with the obviously we mentioned there as a powerlifter and not realizing it was you could actually do it as a coach. And obviously you mentioned there, the story about leading up into Worlds about your athlete who had rang you a week before saying that she'd broken her finger, and it's something that has been a topic that I've spoken about with the coaches that I work with, and obviously yourself had posted about it on your Instagram, is communication and being able to speak to your athlete and your lifter. So basically the first question is, how important is communication between a coach and their athlete?
I would put communication between a coach and athlete at the very top, to be perfectly honest. Without that relationship, that communication with your athlete, you basically don't really have anything. I mean, you might as well just write a program, just send it out, and never see them again until they're done.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in order to have the athletes buy in and to have that bond with the athlete to actually work well together, I do believe that the communication is key.
Yeah. In terms of the communication, obviously, you said there about you can just, if you just sent a program out with no information, not knowing your athlete, you're sort of just walking in blind, if you like. So when it comes to, because obviously people will have different personalities, and some people might you might ask them a question and they might go, they might, or if it's an email or if it's a conversation, might go on and write a really long paragraph, or chat for a long time. When it comes to actually finding information about the lifter when you first started working with them, and getting to know their personality, if they like, what have you found to be the best practices to go about finding the best information and to get information out of different lifters when you first started working with them?
So when athletes first sign up, they usually fill out a questionnaire, kind of giving us their background. So that kind of gives me like a general outline of what they've done, what their goals are. After that, I like to typically hop on a call with them, an actual video call. That way I can get a sense of, because on text and email, you can't really get a grasp of emotions, tone, body language and whatnot. At least face to face, you can see exactly what they sound like when they're talking about certain topics and whatnot, and actually get a good feel for who they are as a person, what they're like. Are they, a little bit more shy? Are they more extroverted? Are they really loud? Stuff like that really helps out. And so I like to hop on a call with them first, and I'll ask them generally the same questions and see what their response is versus how their questionnaire went. Some people might say, I did A, B, and C, but then when they go into it, like, oh, I did A, B, and C, but it was terrible. I absolutely hated it. This did not work for me. That gives me a lot more information. And then sometimes they like to go on a huge tangent about their bad experiences. And that gives me a better idea of, okay, so this person did very well with this, but had bad experience with this. Okay, so that kind of gives me an idea of what to try to avoid or to try not to replicate, so this person doesn't have a similar experience moving forward.
Yeah. I suppose that's boiling it down to every individual, every lifter is going to be different.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to, obviously you mentioned there that some people might be quite shy or quite loud. In terms of a lifter and coach's relationship, do you find sometimes, or what's your opinion on, do you think that sometimes different personalities attract different coaches, or do you think that they naturally gravitate towards each other, and can sometimes that cause a clash if some coaches are a little bit have a different personality to the lifter? What sort of your thoughts on that?
Oh, for sure. This hasn't really happened to me personally, but I've seen it firsthand where an athlete is, they're very keen on learning. They're just thirsty for knowledge all the time. So they're always asking questions. And we've had coaches where they're a little bit more on the quiet side, a little bit more on the conservative side. They like to just kind of give out your ABCs and that's it, take it. And there tends to be a disconnect in between, because the athlete wants more. They're constantly thirsty for knowledge. They keep asking questions. It's like that child that keeks asking why. Yeah. And for that, the coach, eventually it gets too overwhelming for them, and their response starts becoming a little more disconnect and whatnot, or there's the expectation that they should just get it. And after a while, the vibe kind of starts rubbing off on each other, and it becomes a little bit awkward. Yeah. So I do think that certain personalities attract certain personalities, and vice versa. They, some might not get along with other people.
Yeah. With that, obviously, you mentioned if some lifters or some clients that you work with are quite, they like to ask questions. I know I've had clients, and I'm sure you've had clients as well, that, oh, well, what about this? What about this? Yeah. And I think sometimes, when I first started out, sometimes I wasn't 100% sure of the answers. So I think sometimes, like you mentioned there, you can get a little bit frustrated, and like you say, that disconnect can sort of form. do you think sometimes that that is more highlighted in beginner coaches, and as a coach you should develop to be able to, you know, answer those questions, or, you know, provide them with an answer? Do you think that comes with experience, or do you think sometimes that people are just like, look, this is the way I want to go, and, you know, then that disconnect can form?
It's a bit of both. I would say more so the experience level of the coach. I think a lot of people, at least a lot of the beginner coaches that I spoke to, they kind of walk in with the expectation that coaching is very black and white. It's, I write the program, you follow as I say, that's it. There's no questions behind it. I am the coach. You don't question the coach. That's very similar to kind of old school Taekwondo mentality, where like the coach gives you drills, you perform it to 110%. That's it. There's no bargaining back and forth. There's no like questions. Like, you don't ask me questions. You just do it.
Yeah.
And I think some of the new coaches, they have that mentality as well, where I'm the coach, here's the program. Yeah. And as you gain more experience, I know that I kind of fell into that trap in the beginning as well, coming from a martial arts background. And as actually, the person that really taught me was my girlfriend, because you can't say, do this and don't ask questions and expect nothing bad to happen, especially when you go home. That doesn't end well. So I learned very quickly that you have to take the time to actually listen. You know, what might be a concern to them isn't necessarily a concern to you, but at the end of the day, it's them that are experiencing it, and you need to be able to understand where they're coming from. And that comes with experience. Some coaches, they let's say the extreme introverted type, they might not be comfortable with working with athletes that are very extroverted and like to be in their faces all the time. So that could potentially be an issue. Excuse me. But I don't see that happening as often, especially with more experienced coaches. I've seen a lot of very, very experienced coaches who are introverted, but they adapt very well to a variety of athletes. So I think at the end of the day, experience does help a lot with personality in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for myself, as I've developed as a coach, looking back at how like, for example, just, you know, moving aside from actual coaching, but actually programming, sometimes you'll try and fit everything in there, whereas actually as you develop, you get a little bit more experience, right? What's actually going to be the biggest benefit in this program? And yeah, like you mentioned as well, listening is a really I think I say less now and listen more with clients than probably I did at the start, which I think is a good lesson to learn as a coach. And I'm sure we'll touch on that as we get further through the podcast. Just on the note of at the start, sort of, you mentioned there having, right, this is the way we're going to do it. These are the drills we're going to do. We're going to stick with this. What are your thoughts on sometimes when you first start working with a lifter, using that as a method? Because obviously you need to put a plan in place to make sure that lifter, you know, see how they respond to it and then change later down the line. And sometimes people, for the coaches listening, that's sometimes not necessarily a bad thing, but what are your thoughts on doing that all the time? And, you know, should it just be a short-lived type of mentality to have?
I think there's a time and place to do it. You know, like I have some athletes that love variations. They're sold on variations is the key to a perfect off season or a great off season. And my opinion is not necessarily the same as theirs, or, you know, our opinions don't necessarily line up. And that's where that communication really comes into play. If I can program an accessory or a variation that really speaks with them, not necessarily what I believe in, but if it really speaks to them and their adherence drastically goes up and it's a right time to do it, I'll program it in. You know, for instance, like off season. But, you know, if it's closer to competition, you know, like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks out, that's when we need to have that conversation and explain to them why we can't vary too far from what we need to focus on. Specificity is key when it gets closer and closer to competition. And yes, it's important to let them know, like, hey, this is the program, you need to stick with it, but also it's providing the why. It's easy for somebody to say, you need to do A, B, and C, go do it. But will they actually understand? Will they actually do it? Not necessarily. Or if they do it, they don't necessarily have their buy-in. Providing the why and explain to them, okay, we can do it, but just not right now because A, B, and C. That I find helps a lot, and you get a lot further with that because they actually understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And maybe whatever it is they want to do, like certain variations or certain splits or whatever, we can do that later on, and that kind of helps out it helps their buy-in as well, because they're understanding that, okay, my coach isn't hearing me out right now, but they understand where I'm coming from, and they'll listen once the competition is done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point about buy-in, because especially within powerlifting, I think right now, because there is, powerlifting is growing, and there's quite a lot of coaches out there, and with the online powerlifting coaching and the communication that you have, I know for me, for competition days, I like being told what to do and making sure that my coach is there, so that it is that support system, and with that buy-in, I think it's a good case of I can't think of the saying. Giving them what they not just giving them what they want, but also balancing it with what they need. And I think that is a good balance. What's your thoughts on if when a lifter's speaking with their coach, that sometimes it goes too far one way, and the coach ends up just giving them what they want and forget about, right, actually we need to concentrate on X, Y, and Z, rather than just like what you mentioned, giving them all the variations?
It happens a lot, to be honest. I've experienced that. Actually, I've done that myself when I first started. I was so caught up on giving athletes what they want. It was so far from what they needed to do, and the performance showed. It wasn't their best performance. It didn't reflect on their training, and it was because I was so caught up on what the athlete wanted. I just gave it to them because I wanted their buy-in. Yeah. But at the expense of their performance. And as a learning experience, it's fine, but I think it's also important that you have to realize what you have to realize what you've done, and take that as a learning experience. And if you're able to take that as a learning experience, over time you'll learn when to give a little bit of slack and give them what they want, and when to pull back and steer them in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it comes back to what we were chatting about, about experience and, growing it. Because I think sometimes, especially as a newer coach, on the topic of buy-in, that you want to work with people and you want to, give them the best service that you can. But actually sometimes that can be a little bit of a hindrance than actually giving them a good service. Touching on sort of, obviously you mentioned about filling in the questionnaire and getting information from lifters and clients. What are your ways of, or the process of actually getting information from the lifters before you start working with them, and then once you start working with them, sort of getting to understand how you interpret that information, and notice when, for example, if they're starting to feel a little bit tired, or if you need to start changing up the programming, how do you sort of interpret and get the information from the lifters when you start working with them?
Mm-hmm. So one of the most common scenarios that I come into is an athlete, especially a newer athlete. So they'll say after 3 weeks, they'll tell me, "Oh, today's workout was terrible, and everything felt heavy. I just wasn't feeling today." And my initial thoughts are, okay, this athlete is beat up. But for me, I like to pump the brakes a bit, and I'll ask them a little bit more probing questions. And this kind of helps build that relationship. So I'll ask them something like, how was your day? Aside from training, how was your day like? Did you get enough? Like, how was your sleep? How's your nutrition? And I would say 9 times out of 10, something spirals out of that. Yeah. They had a stressful time at school, relationship, or just didn't have a good sleep. Stuff like that. That helps me get a bigger picture of what exactly is going on, so that I can put things into perspective. Okay, you might not be doing very well. Last week you smashed your workout. this week is not going so well, but you also mentioned you have your exams coming up next week. So that comes a lot into play. So you're going to be pretty stressed out. Your time is limited. Why don't we try scaling back a little bit, or maybe work up to an RPE rather than prescribe percentage, or, break it up. If you're supposed to do sets of 8, maybe break it down to something that's a little bit more tangible, that's more within your mental capacity at that point in time. Offer solutions like that to help them get around it, or just if there's nothing on the line, there's no timelines, take an extra day off. If your exams are really stressing you out, take an extra day off. It's okay. And I think at the end of the day, it's just a matter of asking the right questions. It's not just you're having a bad day, suck it up, do it. Try to find out what else is going on other than what's going on at gym, because 9 times out of 10, a lot of the issues arise outside of the gym. And what happens inside the gym is just a manifestation of everything globally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the more you sort of delve into coaching and how to get people stronger, and, progress lifters, progress powerlifters, is once you've sort of got a fundamental or a baseline knowledge of programming, then it's just sort of like you say, looking at the everything that's happening outside of the gym, and making sure that because sometimes people will have a bad day. They might argue with the girlfriend, or like what you mentioned about exams. Sometimes that can happen. You touched on one thing, sort of, buy-in and adherence to the program. And when there is sort of if things are happening outside of the gym and people are struggling a little bit, what's the process of sort of right? We still need you to stick to the program, because sometimes there's some elements that you can see that a text might go outside. Yeah, let's just keep going this week. Let's just keep building. But in terms of building that relationship, how do you go about forming that adherence and keep them going through with check-ins and doing that a little bit extra?
For me, if they have a bad week, typically I like to see them push through the first week. Just, if it's external factors, explain to them that, these are factors that may be hindering your performance. Let's try our best to stick with this week's program, and let's see what happens next week. If next week you're still having a bad week, let's make some adjustments, because maybe it was just a one-off week, and maybe next week your performance will do much better once all the external factors are eliminated. If that is the case, we go right on track. Yeah. If for whatever reason things are not going as accordingly, then we make the appropriate adjustments so that they can stick to the if they're preparing for a meet, so that they are prepared for the competition and we're not derailed. Whether that means a mini deload might come into play, or make some adjustments to a program, or simply just removing accessories so that they have more time to just focus on squat, bench, and deadlift. A lot of things can come into play to make adjustments to make their training a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there, that you can adjust as it goes, and I know that I've started to learn as well that that the program is essentially quite fluid, quite flexible. When you can go week to week, because like we've mentioned there, people can their week can change week to week depending on their social life and whatever or stress levels and everything on the outside of the gym. Obviously, going into mention sort of building up to a competition in terms of because I think, for me, the culmination of the work that the coach and the lifter and the relationship that they've built is sort of highlighted when it comes to working with somebody on competition day, and when it comes to the platform. Now, sometimes, like for myself, I'm quite quiet on competition days, and usually I would quite like to have a little bit of a conversation with my coach, throughout the week, throughout the day. When it comes to competition day, I'm relatively quiet and just. I want to be told what to do and just focus on getting on the platform and lifting. What have you found to be sort of the best practice, if you like, or what's your go-to guide to helping and supporting a lifter when it comes to competition day?
It's kind of accumulative. It's not something that I just pick up in one day. It's kind of accumulating as you gain experience working with the athlete. So take Owen Hubbard, for instance. For him on competition day, he's very focused. He doesn't require a whole lot of pep talk. He has his headphones in. He has his music playing. He's good to go. All you need to do is just be there with him. Make sure that he's focused to do his workout, and there's no really external factors really distracting him. And he's very self-sufficient. He does exactly what he needs to do. He knows what he needs to do, and he executes. Whereas I have other athletes that need that little bit more interaction to kind of downplay the stress a little bit. So one of my athletes from Singapore, they tend to get in their head more often than not. So in those situations, and you can see that in training as well, if one bad training day, you see paragraphs and paragraphs of why things didn't go well. And you can kind of imagine how that would play out on game day when, let's say, the warm-ups aren't going as well as they should. So that's when I step in and just kind of downplay everything, if need be, explain to them that, hey, that moved well, like, what are you feeling? If they start getting a little bit negative, then I tend to change the topic, or maybe even there's time and place to do it, but sometimes I even do a white lie. Yeah. So if, let's just say, the warm-up looked horrendous and he knows it, I won't bluntly say, like, dude, that was bad. That was bad. I'm like, okay, that was good. Yeah. It's like, let's try this a little bit more. Let's take a little bit longer break. And they move fine. Don't sweat it. And I might have a plan B or even a plan C in my book just in case. Yeah. But it's important to pay attention to these things and not let the athlete get in their own head. Because once that happens, the competition's over before it even started.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because there's some people who on the day that, like you say, get in their head. Some lifters can be absolutely awesome leading up to a competition. And then when it comes to competition day, their head just goes. With the communication leading up to that, and do you usually find that it actually comes to that's what some people are like, and when it comes to competition day, it's how you handle them? Or can that sort of be managed leading up to a competition, in terms of when you're speaking to them leading up to it? Or is it a case of people will just, that's what some people can be like on competition day? What have you found?
To an extent, it can be managed. Like that specific athlete, when I've been working with them for over a year and a half now. When we first started, every training session this was bad. Like, I would get paragraphs and paragraphs of everything that's bad. And you can tell that really drains them. After one training day, they're basically defeated, right? And leading up to the next training day, they already have it in their head that the last training day was bad. This one, they have to have, they have this certain benchmark that they have to hit. And if they don't get that, it's going to pull them down even more. So when I start noticing trends like that, I'll ask them, like, okay, after your next training session, I want you to tell me 2 good things that you really, really enjoyed about that training session, what you found just worked very, very well for you, and give me 1 bad thing. It kind of forces them into the habit of looking at the brighter side of things, or what actually did go well. And as time goes on, he starts realizing that, hey, there's actually more good things than bad things. And the bad things are maybe something that they're hyper-focused on, whether it's a slight pitching fork, but they completed all the reps and sets and the form deviation was next to nothing. That's something worth celebrating about, rather than I was a little bit tipped forward on this 1 rep. Well, the 1 rep didn't make a huge difference when you completed, say, 30 reps in total, and they were all fantastic and you didn't fail a single rep. Those things like that. And that kind of mentality, you can build that up as you go into competition. Okay, so warm-ups, they didn't feel awesome, but they didn't feel good, but they looked great. Depth was perfect. And sometimes even give them inside information about other athletes. I've had this happen at nationals, where my athlete, he experienced a knee injury for probably, I'd say, about 6 months. So it really hindered his training. And there was a couple of instances where he actually didn't want to compete anymore, just because it was so draining. It was just frustrating. His knee was hurting all the time.
Right.
And we had a breakthrough. His knee actually, we did some rehab. His knee got significantly better, but it was still in the back of his mind that it could happen. It could flare up. And it just so happens that I was listening to his competitors, and they were also injured, or they had a very bad, like they had a very drastic weight cut. One of them barely made weight, and that specific individual, they also like to cut depth when they're squatting. They post videos on social media. So I'll give them that kind of information, like, hey, you're competing this guy, but he also had a really bad weight cut. Like, he just made it, and we know he's squatting high. So based off his attempts, based off of his history, there's a good chance he'll probably miss this one. So why don't we scale back a little bit, be a little more conservative, and we'll make the attempt. We'll build a total. Let them screw up. And you see their demeanor start changing into a little bit more positive, into more of a planning rather than an executing mentality. And that I found a lot of success in that.
Yeah, I think, everyone, I mentioned there about, mentioning other lifters. Once you've got a positive mindset, I've used this going into powerlifting. I come from a rugby background. And if I remember my old coach, my old rugby coach used to say, if you walk on the pitch and think you're already beaten, I think you mentioned this at the start as well, start of this chat, that if you walk on the platform or walk on the pitch thinking that you're already beaten, that's half the battle. That's half the battle gone. And when you're chatting there about I had one bad workout or that one bad rep. A theme at the minute that is sort of working with the sort of general population clients that I work with and the powerlifters as well, is that we're not chasing perfection. It's just progress. So that one workout, that one bad set doesn't undo all the bad work that you've done before. That doesn't mean to say that it's bad, just progress. Right, let's move on to the next one. Exactly what you said. What's been good about that set?
100%.
Just on a little bit of a tangent, if you like, you mentioned about a lifter who had injured their knee. When it comes to injuries, because some lifters can pick up quite a lot of injuries throughout their lifting career. Some people are quite lucky and never have any big niggles. I know I hurt my back last year after the British. Didn't really have enough. Obviously the topic of this chat is communication. Enough communication with the coach that I had. Then changed coaches, and I found myself mentioning a lot about my back in all of my lifts. Like, I'm not 100% sure about this. What have you found when working with athletes that either have niggles or injuries, or are working back from an injury? How that changes the level of communication, or how do you build their confidence back up?
I can go on this for forever. I've actually had a lot of I've actually had a lot of athletes that experience injuries. I mean, with powerlifting, because we're so focused on squat, bench, deadlift, it's inevitable that somebody will experience some kind of aches and pains at some point in time. I'm very fortunate that I have a variety of talent on my team. For instance, like Kedrick, who is excellent with nutrition, Jacob, who is excellent with physio. If I have those are typically my first line of defense if something happens. So let's say for a bikini competitor, if they have some kind of issue, their weight's not dropping, or their hormone level aren't quite what we expected, I'll touch base with Kedrick. Hey, this is their nutrition. What are your thoughts? What do you think could be? And they provide some insight, and we'll make some adjustments if need be, or maybe just ride it out for another week or so and see how that goes. With like Jacob, who's excellent with physio, I'll ask them like, hey, this is what they're experiencing. What are your thoughts? And he'll give me some insight. But first thing I usually do with my athletes is, first of all, tell them to calm down. I had an athlete that's recently, we'll talk about the one with the injured knee. So right off the bat, his knee was hurting. So my first thing is tell him to calm down. Yes, it hurts. Let's calm down first and see what exactly is going on. So we'll kind of go through a checklist of more of a pain assessment, and that kind of gives him a wider perspective of where exactly he's at. Is he actually that injured? And once we go through questionnaires, what's his pain level like? What's his pain level like outside of the gym? Is there any numbness, anything like that? A lot of times it turns out it's not as bad as they think it is. And that kind of gives them a little bit of a sigh of relief. Yeah. Once we've kind of established what degree their pain or injury is at, then we can start modifying and start figuring out, okay, let's see what you can do. And I think just being able to make that adjustment kind of boosts their confidence a little bit, because they can still do something. I think for an athlete, the worst thing you can tell them is to not do anything because of an injury, because now you're completely stagnant and it's frustrating. Yeah. And then for myself, when I tore my PCL back in the day when I was competing, I was leading up to US Open for Taekwondo, and I tore my PCL and my knee just was shot. And everybody just told me that I can't do anything, and you can't help but to feel helpless. Yeah. And they're like, no walking, you can't even be on your leg. And it's just the worst feeling ever. And with that experience, I never want that for my athlete unless it's absolutely necessary. So that's where we ask those questions first to see if we need to go there. Yeah. 99.9% of the time, we don't need to go there. So if they can do unilateral work, okay, let's start you doing unilateral work, and we'll divert the focus to, let's say, bench press. You can't squat without your knees hurting. Let's focus on maintain muscle mass on your quads and hamstrings and figure out what exactly is the issue with your knee. And we'll put most of the focus on bench. This is a great opportunity to build up your bench. And it kind of takes your focus away from the knee and onto something more positive. And that's where you see, for this individual anyways, his bench just blew up because all he could do focus was on bench. It did beat him up a little bit that he couldn't squat as often or as much as he wanted to, but that time off away from squatting gave the injury a chance to heal, and his bench came up quite a bit. Yeah. And when it came to competition day, his knee was well rested. It didn't flare up again, so he was right back to where he was before, doing minimal work, made gains on his bench press, and ended up winning nationals as a whole. So it was a long journey, but at the end of it, he came out winning. There was no regrets, and now he's healthy again, and we can continue training again.
Yeah, I think that's a really good sort of a way to look at it. When we've chatted with about buy-in and adherence to it, and ultimately, and again we've touched on it, that things outside of the gym can have an influence on it. And for the type of sport that powerlifting is, you are going to pick up injuries. And a key word that I picked out there from it is that it was part of the journey. And as a coach, you're just managing that person. You're managing them as a person. Because they can, like we've mentioned before, they can sometimes get inside their own head. But also manage them like, right, okay, let's take a step back and let's focus on bench. And it gives them something. I know sometimes, through injury, people need to focus on something. And sometimes when seeing, I don't know whether you've had this as well, having spoken to physios or doctors, you can't do this. We're going to need to stay away from that. Always sometimes just drip feeding a little bit of that movement in and be like, exactly what you said. Let's try and work on this, as opposed to diving straight back in and ultimately injuring. I think the worst thing is when it comes to an injury is just keeping things the same and let's just go lighter and not changing anything, because again, you mentioned it there, that sort of sense of helplessness, especially when communication is such a big part between a powerlifter and a coach, you can sometimes be felt a little bit adrift, if you like.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times coaches kind of fall into the trap where, because pain is relative to an individual, for me, a level 7 might be a level 2 for you. Yeah. And I think a lot of times coaches fall into the trap that athletes are kind of faking it or overplaying it. And so they kind of dismiss the warning signs. And that's where, telling them to push through training or, like suck it up, so to speak. And I think that's when things start really snowballing and really getting out of control, is when we dismiss those little early signs. It's okay to back up a little bit. It's not going to make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things. But if you keep pushing and kind of try to push for big numbers, that's when you start making those bigger injuries and those bigger stalls, because you've ignored all those signs prior.
Yeah, it's that saying of, when if you're working up and using RPE, is one thing I try and tell the lifters that I work with is don't be greedy. Look, let's take that,
Yep.
and like when you we've mentioned before, trying to rein them in a little bit. Look, let's take that for today. Let's play the long game.
Yep.
It's funny you say about saying that you should have pushed a little bit more. A guy actually competed in his first. It was just a beginners powerlifting competition, no singlets or anything like that. The rules are obviously still the same, still strictness on rules, but it was just sort of for people who wanted to get involved in it, because I think sometimes the sort of like regional competitions can be a little bit daunting, really, when you've got people who have competed at national and competing. Anyway, he competed in his first competition, and it was a case of right, you've done the training 100%. We've got some PBs in mind. We've got a plan, and it came to his final squat, and it just looked as though he gave up basically. When you looked back at the video, it was sort of what you mentioned there about telling people to push through. I actually said, "Where was your fight? Come on, yeah. You could have you could have ended with a little bit of a PB there." So I think that is when it comes to competition day. If you agree, when it comes to competition day, you've sometimes got to have that little bit of fight and find that little bit extra.
Definitely.
In training, it's always underneath performance. It's not a case of we don't need to overshoot it and really push. We've touched on a couple of sort of the how to go about the best way of communicating as a coach. Have you found, or where can coaches go wrong? We've touched on a few things of it on this, but where do you find coaches can sometimes go wrong when it comes to communication with athletes? And what sort of, for the lifters listening, what should they sort of, if they are working with a coach, if something is going wrong, to look out for?
I think something that tends to go wrong is when coaches are fixated on one. Basically, they have their blinders on and they're fixated on what is most optimal. On literature, we know basically what's most optimal for powerlifting. I mean, powerlifting is quite simple: squat, bench, and deadlift. There's not a whole lot of dynamics involved. It's not like football or anything where there's like speed, power, and whatnot. Basically, it's just max effort, squat, bench, and deadlift. I think a lot of people on literature, it's easy, but people get hyper focused on what is optimal, but not necessarily what works best for everybody else. Maybe some athletes don't have that discipline to only do the 3 main lifts all the time. Yes. Some people like a little bit of novelty in there. Some people like to do bicep curls. It makes their life a little bit more fun. Likes to fill in their sleeves a little bit more. Why not? I do.
Everybody loves bicep curls.
Oh, of course. And then, just look more jacked doing bench press. But I think a lot of people do fall under that trap where they just focus on optimality and they forget that we are working with athletes and that, training has to be diverse. And at the end of the day, like I mentioned before, adherence is key. If they're not able to adhere to the program, you can write the best program ever, but they can't follow it because they don't like it. Yeah. If you tell me to do 10 sets of 10 for squats, I'm going to blow my mind. I just can't do it by the third set. Like I'm already I just want to lay down and not get up again. I know on paper that makes so much sense because it helps me build a ton of volume. Yeah. But is that practical? Do I have the time to actually do it? For me, no. I have at most an hour and a half to train per day. If my coach tells me to do that, it's setting me up for failure because I just simply cannot do it. Yes, on paper, I should be able to do it, especially if I put specific rest time periods. Yes, if I put 2 minutes rest periods in between every set, ideally I can finish in X time frame. But that's not always the case. Doing sets of 10, as every set goes on, your rest period goes from 1 minute to 30 minutes. And not only because you're trying to catch your breath, but because mentally you just beat up. The set to 10 just kills everybody. So I think a lot of times the coaches forget that we are working with humans and there's a lot of emotions involved. So we have to find things that really speak with them and that allows them to be motivated and be disciplined enough to follow, to continue on with the structure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say about the when I first started working with my coach, I actually had 3 sets of 10 on. It was actually high bar squats, and they absolutely ruined me. And we stuck with them for a while, and I say a while, it was a couple of weeks, and it got to a point where going, because I think communication plays a big role in the psychology of a lifter. That's basically the root of it, getting to find out how that person ticks. And It just got to a point where every time I was going into that session, I was thinking, oh my God, it's going to take me so long to get these 3 sets of 10 done. And I think that's where I'm a sort of a big believer in. You said there about what's optimal, and you can look at the research studies, is balancing the research and what the best practice might be, if you like, with the real world, and trying to manage it. My thoughts is that as a coach, you're a problem solver. You're trying to, and we've mentioned it before. You're managing that person, managing that athlete. Mm-hmm. And trying to guide them through and solve the issues that they may have. When it comes to sort of best practices, and again, I really enjoyed the post that you put out there about the practices that you should be looking for as a coach or a lifter looking for a coach. What do you think are the best values that powerlifters, that lifters should be looking in coaches, and the best practices that they should follow, as well as developing that communication between yourself and the lifter?
I've actually turned away a few inquiries because I felt like we weren't the best fit, or I wasn't exactly what they're looking for. Even though I'm with the brand, the Strength Guys, I want what's best for the athlete. And if my style of coaching or what I am capable of doing isn't necessarily what's in line with what they envision, we could be setting each other up for failure. So I think one of the biggest things is, don't look for a coach. And obviously I'm not instant famous by any means, but I've heard stories where people go to coaches because they're popular on social media, and that might not necessarily be the best reflection of them as a coach. I mean, they're great on social media, but does that mean that they have the tools they need to bring the best out in you? So I think it's best to look at the results that they're able to create with their athletes. That's one of the key things. And also, don't be hesitant to talk with the coaches. Ask to hop on a call with them, or even just chat with them on social media if that's possible. Just get a feel for who they are as a person, because at the end of the day, you're gonna be working with this person potentially for a long time, and you want to be able to talk with this person not only as a coach but as a potential friend as well. A lot of my athletes end up being friends because you can only talk about training for so long, and sometimes things happen in your day. You're so used to talking on a regular basis, you just can't help but to share certain stories about your different aspects in life. One of my athletes, we started out as just purely coach and athlete. 3 years later, I got invited to her wedding, and whenever I'm in town, she asked me to come over, and my girlfriend and my dog to stay with her and her husband. And it's that kind of relationship. Never in my mind would I think that a coach athlete relationship would go that far. But if you're open to it, and if you actually value the relationship, you can develop some really good friends there.
I think that's great to hear. I think that's, as a lot of people that I coach, I get on really, really well with it. And, as a coach or a personal trainer, you're in the business of people, if you like, and you've got to be able to build those relationships. And, there's some people, I remember when I first started working as a personal trainer, my very first client he was an ex-professional rugby player. Played at a really good level. I think he actually played for England B team in rugby, and he was sort of my first client. And I remember walking up and thinking, oh my God, how am I gonna train this guy? And I put a program together, and he basically wanted to lose a little bit of weight. He wasn't playing as much rugby. He had a desk job. He lost a little bit of weight. After his first assessment, he sat down. It was probably the best compliment. He said, "I had my doubts about you, but you're actually all right," which I thought was, a really good compliment. And I trained that guy for just over 2 years. And we stay in touch every now and again. He just moved away from the area, but I think that's great when you build that relationship, and I think it builds that enjoyment of the whole process as well.
100%.
And when you're chatting there about looking at coaches online and the people that have a really, really big following, sometimes I think it is just smoke. Sometimes it is just, look at me. Would you agree? That there's not sort of much quality behind it, and looking at the people that they're training, the results that you're getting. Would you say that sometimes it is just the person who can shout the loudest can sometimes be seen as the better coach?
Oh, absolutely. Some people are great at marketing, like hands down to them. I'm not good at marketing, or not to that extent. So I can never get to them. But somebody like Mike Tashir, he has an excellent following, but he also has the experience and knowledge to back it up. Yeah. Somebody like that is a very, very good example of a good coach. But I think a lot of people, especially with good followings, they get so focused on numbers, and that ends up being a downfall as well. And what I mean by numbers is just like grabbing a lot of clients. And as an athlete / client, I mean, last thing you want to be looked at is just a number. You want to be looked at as an individual. So you also want to find a coach that looks and treats you as an individual, that actually remembers your name, not just like, okay, here you go, here's a program. And I've seen that before, and it's a little bit daunting to see that, because that's where we've come to. You find a coach that has an amazing following, but do they treat you as an individual? Chances are this person with, let's say, 1 million followers, they probably have thousands of DMs and inquiries daily. So who are you to separate from everybody else?
Yeah.
They probably do have a ton of athletes, and it might be the dream to join this dream team, but do they know who you are? Yeah. And when things get ugly, that relationship really comes into hand, because you want to have somebody to talk to. You want to have somebody that you can rely on and share your ups and downs with. And if the person doesn't even know your name, who are you going to share that with? And that's where that frustration gets. And I think a lot of times that's where people end up leaving their coaches, because they don't feel that they're being heard.
Yeah. It's like what we said before about that ultimately you can end up being friends with them and enjoy that process. Nobody likes it's the same in the real world. When you're ringing up companies and saying about something, everyone likes to be seen that they are remembered. One of the best things is that there's a local pub not too far away from me, and when I went in before last time, they remembered what beer I had, and that service like that is like, all right, okay, I want to come there. I completely agree.
You remember things like that. You feel special about it, and you just can't help it to go back, even if it's like a small pub that's in a corner. They remember you. They have exactly the beer you want. You want to go back to them all the time because you feel special.
Yeah, and it comes around sort of full circle from what we chatted at the start. That people, it's that buy-in. And that's how working with a coach will help with that, because obviously why I wanted you on as a guest is the sport of powerlifting is growing and growing, which is great to see. But obviously I think people, whether that's coaching, because obviously we looked at it from both sides, from the coaching side of point of view, and what lifters should be looking for, that as it grows there's still going to be a lot of misinformation and people looking in the wrong areas, whereas I think the fundamentals shouldn't be forgotten. And a big thing at the minute is is communication, which I think is sometimes often overlooked. And like what you said there, you know, if people have 1 million followers or 1 million clients or whatever, sometimes they can be lost as just a number. So from everything that we've covered there, I know I really enjoyed that chat. It's a topic that sort of I was quite looking forward to covering, because I don't think it's a topic that's really being chatted about a lot. From everything that we've chatted about there, for everyone listening, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
When it comes to looking for a coach, find somebody that you can really connect with, and do your research. You know, don't look for the fanciest, most popular coach out there. Look for one that can answer your whys. I would say that's the biggest takeaway, is find a coach that can answer your whys. And as a coach, take a little bit extra time. You know, don't be scared to, you know, I've mentioned this before, don't be scared to work for free. You want to build those relationships. It's not always about business. Yes, we need to pay our bills. We have, you know, we have obligations, financial obligations we need to fulfill. But at the end of the day, you're working with people, and you need to build that relationship. It's not just about money. And I think that's a huge takeaway, in my opinion anyways.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. I know, I think sometimes people can be, again, we mentioned it before, that people will try and work with anyone, and you know, give me money. Some people have, for example, some people in the gym that I've worked in, is because I'm involved in powerlifting. They came, oh, can you coach weightlifting? I am not the coach. I'm not the coach for you. I can, you know, help with your squat and your deadlift, but I'm not a weightlifting coach. Oh, but, you know, can you show me some things? And number one, I don't want to injure you. I don't want to give you, you know, try and coach you something that, one, I'm not confident enough to coach, and, you know, two, I don't want to hurt yourself. And I think it's a good point of just being a little bit of honesty will help. It's like in any relationship, like you mentioned, you know, with partners, you've got to be a little bit, you've got to be honest with them to build that relationship and build forward. And I think people, another key thing, respect that quite a lot as well. And if it ever comes to the point where, you know, they want to come back and do some powerlifting or do some strength training, you can be their port of call, if you like.
For sure.
So for everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Really appreciated you jumping on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
For anyone listening who might want to follow the content that you put out there, or get involved with coaching with yourself and the strength guys, where can people find you, get in touch with you, and see the content that you put out there?
I'm mainly active only on Instagram, so you can find me at Alfred TSG. Feel free to shoot me a message. I answer all my messages. Not that I get a ton. But if you want to find out more about, you know, in general, the Strength Guys coaching services, and more about us, all the coaches within the company and what we do, feel free to check out the Strength Guys on Instagram, or check out our website at thestrengthguys.com.
Absolutely awesome. For everyone listening, I've followed the Strength Guys for quite a while. I'm looking forward to. I've obviously chatted with Jason, chatted with yourself, Alfred. You know, I want to sort of start picking the brains of the other guys over there. The work that you guys do and yourself do is awesome. So for anyone listening, 100% look at what they're doing. Thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with me. I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did, and I will see you all next week.